last bucktail streamer that I'm going to do in this series that I've done in the last few weeks is called the Red and White Bucktail. It's an interesting little pattern. It's a good trout fly. It's also a very good smallmouth fly, which is one of the reasons that I picked it. It's very simple in how it's made. There's nothing really complicated. However, it's kind of interesting. The body itself right here is tapered. It's much thicker up in the front than it is in the back. And there's an interesting technique that's used to produce that taper. So that's part of the reason that I picked it. It also has a collar of red and white Rooster Saddle, but they're both polymered at the same time, so it's all mixed up. It's not, say, the white polymered and then the red polymered in front of it, which is also kind of unique to this fly. So that's the red and white bucktail. Again, this is the last bucktail streamer in a series that I've done in the last few weeks. There will be links down in the description down below to the other videos if you're interested in seeing those. And we'll get started. Start our fly by placing our hook in the vise for the red and white bucktail. This is a Mustad L87 hook in a size 6, just like the other streamers that I've done in the last few weeks. Regular 5X long, even a 4X long if you want to do something a little shorter, streamer hook will work just fine. So after we debarb the hook, I'm using white thread first. This is just a Danville 6.0 in white. I'm going to attach this right at the point of the hook on the hook shank. The first material I'm going to tie in is the tail. I am just using some red hackle fibers from a Whiting American saddle, and I'm basically prepping the feather and using these barbs that are much longer, simply because when I tie those in, I've got a short tail back here, but the other ends will come up into the back end of the body here, and they'll smooth it out a little bit. So I'll bring those perpendicular and then peel those off. And then the butt ends right here, I'm going to cut at a little bit of a slope so that I get a little bit of a taper, like that. I'm going to tie these in about a gap length, maybe a half a shank length long off the back. It's just a short tail. Tie those in so they're right up on top of the hook shank. A couple of wraps to secure them. And then I'm going to tie in our rib. The rib for this is just some Mylar Tinsel. This is in a size 14, gold and silver Mylar Tinsel. And I'm going to tie this in with the gold side up so that when I polymer this around, it will flip over to the silver side. I'm going to bring this up and anchor it right on the side of the hook shank like this, and then just pull the tinsel rearward just to get down to where I have just a little bit sticking out from underneath the thread. That will get covered up and secured if I don't pull it all the way out first. I like to attach it over onto the side of the hook like this, because then when I start to polymer that around, I'll show you in a little bit, applying that rib, it won't interfere with the tail. If I have it on top, or if I have it even on this side here, that first wrap sometimes can come and wrap over the tail and push the tail out of position. Once the rib's in place, I'm going to advance my thread up the hook shank in touching turns, securing the butt ends of the hackle fibers down to the hook shank, just giving me a nice level base. Now I'm using a white thread because the body of this is a white floss. If I were to use a black thread, which I will change to later, it will darken up the floss when this swims in the water, because the floss can be somewhat translucent in the water. So I'm just going to advance the thread up just to secure all those butt ends to the hook shank, and then I'm going to bring it back down to just halfway up the hook shank. I could have just brought it halfway right here, stopped, and put in the floss body, and then just secured all of that too. But you're going to see we're actually going to have 3 wraps of floss up in this area, so that will get covered up and be smoothed up. For the body, I'm using a 4-strand Rayon floss. This is just a white Rayon floss. I want to get about 12 inches. There's a lot of wrapping we're going to do, so you want to make certain that you have a long enough piece that you can get the whole body done and have enough to hold on to comfortably. I'm going to secure this to the hook under the thread wraps, and then I'm going to pull the floss rearward just to get the butt ends of that floss inside the head space or right at the end of the body of the fly. Continue to advance my thread forward, touching turns just to keep it nice and smooth body. If you want to, you could flatten the thread out just a little bit. Again, there's going to be multiple layers of floss in here, so I don't think it's that big of a deal, but if you want to, you can flatten your thread to do that. So when I tie in the body here, the floss is going to go forward up to the end of the body area, and it's going to go back down the hook shank all the way to the tail. So that will give me 2 wraps of floss right here. Then it's going to go down here and then back up again, so I get 2 wraps of floss here. But then when it comes around to the forward section of the body, I'll have a 3rd wrap. So this area right here will be wider in diameter than this area. That's the idea. And rather than try and talk through that whole process, I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and you can listen to a little music. The real key here is you just want to make certain you take your time and make certain that your floss is going on nice and smooth. I've got just slight overlaps as I wrap this on to make the body. That will give you the smoothest body that you can get, and that's the idea, is to try and just get a nice smooth floss body. You'll notice that I'm securing the floss. The end of the body here is a good 2 eye lengths from the eye of the hook. And the reason for that is we have a collar, a double hackle collar to put in here. That's going to take up some room, and then the bucktail wing. So you want to make certain that you end the body about 2 eye lengths, not just 1 behind the eye of the hook. With our floss tied in and secured, I'll now put the rib on. And just like standard streamers, when you're palmering this rib around, you want to make certain that you just have them nice and evenly spaced. It's not critical that you have only so many turns on these kinds of streamers. Now you can see what I was talking about earlier. When I palmer that first wrap of rib around, you'll notice as it comes up around this side, it's well into the body and it's not affecting the tail, so it's not actually able to push the tail out of the way. So I'll secure that rib in, and that pretty much takes care of the body. At this time I'm going to attach my black thread. Again, the same thing, it's just a Danville 6/0 in black to finish out the collar and the wing. I'm going to make certain that I wrap this back so that I have a good 2 eye lengths right there so that I can tie in my hackle. The collar on our fly is actually made up of 2 different hackles, a red and a white. These are just some strung saddle hackles. You could use a schlappen if you want to. It would be much webbier and flow a little bit more. I like the saddle hackles because they are a little bit stiffer. They stick out a little bit more rigid. You're going to find 2 hackles that are about the same, where the barbs are about the same length, and I'm going to stroke those fibers down so that I get those perpendicular with the hook shank. I want to match these up such that somewhere along the feather here, the barb length right here pretty much matches up with the other feather. Holding the tips in my right hand, I'm going to stroke the fibers back down and out of the way. And I'm going to cut the tip off so I just have a nice triangular little anchor right there to tie that in. Now I'm tying these in with the dull side facing me. This would be the concave side, the shiny side is what a lot of people call it, and then there's the dull side facing me. And you'll see why in just a moment. So I'll tie these in right at the end of the body and secure those in along the hook shank. I'm going to end with my thread back up where I first tied it in. The thread is going to help me to anchor these each turn of the hackle. Problem when you're palmering 2 hackles together like this, the part of the problem is that if the stems themselves aren't going onto the hook shank right next to each other, you can get one stem that drifts backwards and starts laying down over hackle fibers that you already have applied. By tying this into the dull side facing me, what happens is when I bring this around, you'll notice that it turns perpendicular to the hook shank. This helps me, then I don't have to pull and fold the hackle fibers backwards. When you do this like this, sometimes it works very well, but sometimes you end up pulling those 2 stems apart. So when you palmer this forward like this, the next wrap may end up being where the white hackle stem is pulled back and it starts laying down on these fibers right here. This way, by tying it in with the dull side facing me, it turns perpendicular. I don't have to necessarily fold those hackles back, but I can just sweep them back a little bit See, you can probably see it right there. It almost separated just a little bit on that wrap. So that's the only tricky thing about polymering two hackles together at the same time. Having your thread hanging there does help a little bit because it helps to push those stems back up against one another. When you get 3 to 4 wraps in, you should be just at the back end of about the head space where we will tie in our bucktail. I'll secure that with 3 wraps and cut the stems right here. I'm going to sweep all these fibers back and then tidy this up a little bit. And I'm going to wrap backwards just a little bit, trapping some of these fibers down. And this is just going to make certain that I've got the proper headspace for tying in the bucktail. Smooth this off a little bit so I have a nice platform for tying that in. It also has the benefit of kind of pointing the hackle fibers in a back direction so they're not out perpendicular. And that's our collar. Our wing is comprised of bucktail. I'm using a red bucktail and a white bucktail. And the red goes on first. I've already prepped some. You're going to want to cut some out, clean it, stack it, and similar to the other streamers that I've done, if the stacked tips aren't exactly perpendicular, that's fine. If they have a little bit of a taper to them, I like that a little bit better. But keep in mind, you do want both the red and the white to be sparse because together they're going to make a wing. It's very easy to get too big of a wing on these flies. You want them a little bit thinner. I tie these in so that the tips are at least to the end of the tail here, or maybe a little bit longer. I'm going to secure that with a pinch wrap. I want my wrap to be towards the back of the head space, not up towards the eye. I'm going to check that to make certain that it's right on top of the head, the hook shank and the head of the fly, so that it didn't start to go around on both sides. I want that wing right up on top. The other thing is your collar here. You'll notice because of the collar here, it tends to kind of push the wing at an upward angle. If you want it to be more streamlined and straight back, you could trim out a little bit of the collar right there, a little notch right there for the wing to set in. If that's looking good, which it is, we'll go ahead and trim off the excess. I'm going to trim this so that it's got a little bit of a slope to it. I'm going to come forward, I'm going to wrap those down a little bit, then come up to the eye and clean that up a little bit. And this again is just giving me a nice level platform for the next clump of bucktail. And the next is some white. I've already prepped this. It's the same as with the red. You just want to make certain that it's fairly sparse. It's not too thick. I prepped these already so you don't have to listen to me bang my hair stacker on the desk. This is going to be the same length as the red, and you also want to try and keep this right up on top. You don't want this to go down and blend in with the red. You want to keep this nice and separated. Take a look at that, and if it's right up on top and the way you want it, we'll put in a few more wraps just to secure that, and then I'll trim away the excess. This, I'm going to hold the scissors up at an angle here and lean the fibers forward so that when I trim these, I get a little bit more of a slope instead of a sharp perpendicular cut. That just helps in securing those fibers down while making the head of the fly, which is what you're going to do now. You're just going to secure all those butt ends, and then you're going to get your thread down to the eye of the hook, and we're going to start wrapping backwards. The head's always made from the eye of the hook backwards. That helps your thread so that it doesn't jump off the materials if you're wrapping from the back forward. You're just going to keep wrapping till we get all of those butt ends covered up. And you'll want to check the other side just to make certain that you've got everything covered up. Then we're ready for a whip finish. I'm going to counter spin my thread counterclockwise to get the thread flat. You don't have to do this, especially if you're going to be putting a clear coat or like a lacquer coat on this to smooth the head out. I like to, simply because I think it gives the fly a little bit a smoother head. These little bumps and everything from the thread right there kind of get filled in and covered up and smoothed off, so the lacquer will actually look a little bit better. I'm going to put in about an 8-turn, maybe 9-turn whip finish here. And that will just smooth that head off and secure it. Cut our thread off. Inspect the fly a little bit more. Looking good. I'm going to take some fly tight head cement, and I'm going to coat the whole head of the fly so that all that soaks in and secures all the hair up underneath those threads and just secures the head of the fly. In a minute we'll go ahead and put some hardest hull on that. 3 coats, maybe 4, and we'll have a nice smooth head to the fly. So the fly tight's all set up and cured on there, so we're ready to put our first coat of hardest hull. Hardest hull is just a clear, hard finish to the fly. It usually takes about 3, maybe 4 coats when you put this on. Even though the first one goes on and it looks fairly thick and the head looks nice and smooth and almost finished, the hardest hull, when it dries, will shrink down to the thread wraps, and it starts to fill in the spacing between the thread wraps. But the first and even second coat, you'll still see bumps from the thread wraps underneath. So it usually takes a 3rd, maybe a 4th coat to get a nice, smooth, glossy head. We'll go ahead and put our first coat on here. Just take your time with it. It'll go on and it'll level itself out. You can just sit and turn this if you want to, and it will, like I said, it will level itself out. Or missed a little spot right down here. Or, as I said, you can just let this sit on here, and when it dries, it will shrink down to all those thread wraps, even though it looks, like I said, that it's completed right now. So I'm going to let that cure, and then off camera I'll put the last 2 coats on that. But that pretty much finishes up the red and white bucktail, and that is the last fly, as I said, in the series of bucktails that I'm doing. This is a nice trout fly. As I mentioned, it is also a very good smallmouth fly. So if you like to swing streamers and if you like to make some bucktail streamers, I highly recommend the red and white bucktail. It's a lot of fun, and it's even more fun to fish. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dresed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.